So basically, my brother worked at SeekNet, and I actually left my hometown where I was living, Espanola. I was gone for 5 years, and when I returned, I needed a job, and my brother was already at SeekNet, and somehow they were starting a kind of new project where they had these audio stories which were on cassette tape that had been available for like the past 25 years or something. They were probably made in the 70s. And these were stories that there was like, I think 22 stories that were made by a man named Bhai Sahib Gurliv Singh. And he has the very like, for us, he has a very classical voice. Like he just has this very breathy, he's very like, and then the Guru spoke. Everything is very epic, whatever he says. And he told these stories. He has this kind of mysterious accent. I'm not exactly sure where his accent is. And so, anyways, a lot of people were raised on them. Somehow, I was not raised on these stories. I didn't really hear much of them until like this process. And so, SeekNet was deciding we're going to take these from cassette tape and we're going to digitize them and put them on the internet. And there was somebody who made some really like simplistic depictions to correlate with every one of these stories. And so the idea was like, well, we're putting on these stories we already have. Why don't we take on this guy Harijot, and he can create more stories like this. So that was my entire purpose to join SeekNet. I didn't know this necessarily, but I was always very interested in stories. I was really retained information. You know, if people told me that, you know, I was doing a meditation or I was doing some bani's and I had a kind of visualization, I will remember that somebody told me that, and that's the only thing I remember from that person. And I will tell them like, hey, remember when you told me this thing? And say, oh my God, Harijat, I forgot about that. And so I've always been able to like, these things are very valuable to me. Spiritual stories are like, it's the real juice. So I've actually always been interested in that. And then eventually I became known as the story guy. Now I'm just like the Sikh history and story guy. And I'm the kind of the go-to for telling stories. And so it's nice to have a kind of role. It's important to have like stories, Sakis are super important. And then I came across, there was a line in Gurbani which says, Bhavaniya kahaniya putta suputta karen. And the Guru is saying that by listening to the kahanis of your babbe, your ancestors, your elders, the children become great children. I remember at some point a friend invited us to go to a wedding in the East Coast. So I think it was my first time visiting Virginia, Washington, D.C. We were meeting some people in the Washington, D.C. area. And, you know, it's always so nice to meet Sangat. And we were meeting some Sikhs over there. And one Uncle Jia, we were walking around and he said, okay, what do you do? I said, well, I make the Sakis on SeekNet. He said, you make the Sakis on SeekNet? He goes, I came across those stories and I started sharing them. I made my nephews and nieces. I guess he doesn't have kids, but he made his nephews and nieces listen to the stories. And he said they got hooked onto them. And he said, that you can see their behavior has changed through time after listening to the stories. And I was just so amazed by this because it's me in my corner of an office. And after that, it goes on the internet and who knows what happens after. What he said was that the behavior changed. That really kind of left an impression on me, like how important stories are. And the truth is, it's a kind of luxurious like seva to do because you have to simply repeat and relay what is already there. The Gurus have already written everything. The Gurus have already done everything. And we have to convey it to somebody else in a way that's understandable, hopefully. That's my only purpose, is to try to take it and make it more digestible and understandable. You also have kids that listen to stories. I'm always like so fascinated to hear like what the kids say about stories.
Yeah, my kids love them. And they know some of the stories verbatim. They could actually do the voices, do line by line. We as a family talk about things like the 3 C's: never compare, never complain,
never compete.
And things like Papa's getting fat from the Mata, I think it's Mata Bakor story. It's become part of our lives. At one point it was part of our everyday routine, our sleep routine. And now it's more of a treat. So when they have good behavior, instead of my wife letting them have TV time, she'll let them have SeekNet Storytime. So that's how much it means to them.
Wow. I mean, that says a lot.
So you personally, how did you get into Sikhi?
So yeah, I mean, I was born, my birth name is Hari Jot Singh Khalsa, because my parents, they both converted to be Sikhs, coming from the hippie movement into the yoga movement, into getting into 3HO Sikhi, they changed their names to, obviously as Westerners, my father's family name was Waters. My mother's family name was Thompson. And so she didn't take on his previous name, because at that point they were already knowing themselves as Singh and Kaur Khalsa. And I know most Sikhs, they have a different caste name, as the official last name is Brar or whatever, Sandhuria and etc. But for us, it only made sense to change the last name, I think. So everybody's middle name is either Singh or Kaur, and then the last name is universally Khalsa.
I was talking to somebody at work actually, because I was telling them that we were going to have this conversation, and this gentleman at work who may be watching this podcast, he does what we call immersive learning. So he does VR, all the tech, all the studio side, the video side is his remit. And he was amazed that there's Sikhs in America from a white background, especially that part of America. He was saying it must be so challenging being in a predominantly kind of Christian area and growing up different. What was your experience like growing up?
I'm just one little anecdote comes to mind where I was a kid and none of our friends were Sikhs. That's in elementary school. I went to a public elementary school, and I had a few good friends and a couple decent friends as well. And I remember we were playing soccer, and somehow or the other, I don't know if some other kid did it on purpose or just fell off. We were playing soccer, and my turban came off. I think some kid took it off actually. And somehow all my friends instinctively knew to surround me, to kind of create a little private room in the middle of a field so that I could retie my patka in privacy. Wow. They didn't have to know. We were little kids. We don't tell them about who's Guru Nanak and what is a turban. They just knew this is my friend and he wears a turban and he's a good guy, and they just understood something about this is important, and they knew to give me a little privacy to retie my patka. So for me, my parents told me that, whenever they started tying some kind of patka on our heads as kids, that from then on, we didn't want to go outside without it. And for me, being seen with the naked hair was like being naked myself. But that's how I always was. I never wanted to go outside without a turban. It's just always been instinctively. A lot of people, it doesn't matter if you're born white or Punjabi, you're born Sikh. Most people, I guess, they have a challenge to decide, do I really want to wear a turban? Or they even take Amrit and they wear Damala for some time, then they shave afterwards and they say, it's too much for me. Yeah. I'm going to be a Sahajdari Sikh. I've never had any inclination ever to cut my hair. I've never had any issue. It's so people say wow, it must be challenging. And I think no, it was never the slightest issue for me personally. I just never questioned it. It all just seemed intuitively, this is what it is. For me, the Sikh lifestyle was always we'd been brought up around so many teachings surrounding it. It wasn't just that we just did Gurbani and we just went to whatever. We went to Gurdwara on Sundays and we did a lot of yogas and meditations and stuff. But it was that there was a lot of teachings surrounding all this stuff. And I think part of it was that my parents had been fully convinced that this is a much better way to do things and a much better way to live. My dad, when he was young, he was going to be a Christian minister. He got really into Jesus. And they called, his nickname was Superstar because there was a play called Jesus Christ Superstar. And he really loved that play about Jesus. And so he bought a bunch of tickets and had everybody go. And then he was going to become a minister, and he started studying the Bible. And he just concluded that it's been edited and who knows what really the original thing was. And he became very disillusioned. And then he became introduced to Sikhi, and everything had a reason and everything made so much more sense. So I think coming from that background, it's there was every aspect of what we did always seemed to be proven through time. Well, we believe in karma and we believe in reincarnation. Well, karma is so obvious. It's just like it's becoming more. Everybody now accepts that karma is a reality. Any religion, everybody says, "What you see, so you shall reap." Reincarnation is also becoming much more accepted, and there's lots of stories about how people who don't believe in reincarnation, they believe in only one lifetime. They see their past lifetimes, and they produce information that there's no way they could know in this lifetime. Then there's like, we were always raised to believe that taking a cold shower in the morning is super healthy for you. It'll make your immune system better. It'll make you're able to regulate your temperature. You'll have more vitality, etc. Your skin will be more clear. Lots of benefits to waking up first thing in the morning and taking a cold shower. Guess what? Everybody is now infatuated with Wim Hof, and it's like this amazing revolution within the health community to go and submerge yourself in cold water. Meditation, it's being proven that these things work. Repeating mantras has an effect on the brain. There's a supposedly, you're a doctor, maybe you can verify this, that they're able to measure the electromagnetic field of different parts of the human. So they say that the electromagnetic field of the brain is so many inches or feet, and the electromagnetic field of the heart is exponentially larger, meaning that if you can resonate from your heart, you have so much bigger of an impact on the world.
Yeah, there's actually a whole field being developed called heart math, where they look at improving their coherence in terms of the heart rhythm isn't necessarily completely uniform, and that heart rate variability can be modified through meditation, and that actually has an aura. It actually produces an aura which can be measured.
Everything in Sikhi, to me, is like the most advanced. Think about the gurus like this. You had Jesus, and he showed up at the age 30. I believe he was traveling around learning and teaching in various countries in the West and the East. He went all over the place, I believe, Egypt and Greece. And then he came back to Palestine. He started teaching age 30 to 33. In these 3 simple years, 3 years is nothing. He laid the foundation, which became the largest religion on the planet, 1 billion followers. Or is it 2 billion? It's the largest religion on the planet, in whatever the number is. In 3 years. Guru Nanak showed up. Suppose he was born enlightened, or he became enlightened at age 30 or 40, and then when he started his udasis at the age around 30 or a little bit younger, perhaps. Suppose he started at that time at age 30. Then he lived till age 70. He's already got more than 3 years. He's got 40 years. Then he continues on in the form of 10 gurus. So to me, the message is like the divine is looking at this project and saying, look, we sent this guy Jesus. He told people to turn the other cheek if you're slapped. You give them 100 years time, and what they do, they start cutting people's heads off for believing in something other than Jesus. And they did the Spanish Inquisition. So you have 10 gurus. There's nothing like that. There's nothing where a Messiah lived and walked with his feet on earth for more than 200 years. It's unparalleled. It's unbelievable. And I believe that the world has not yet understood the significance of what the gurus are.
Sikhs haven't really done justice at getting the message out there.
I have a lot of thoughts on all the things that you're saying. One is that we can be hard on ourselves, and we can be good, nice to ourselves. And we should do both, because the truth is that the number one charitable religious group in the country of England is the Sikhs. You survey 100 Sikhs, and 95 of them give to some kind of das fund. The next is every other denomination: Christian, Jews, Muslims, etc. Sikhs are the most generous people. If you find like any video on Sikhi that's put by a non-Sikh, there was like the life history of what is Sikhism. There was a couple famous like YouTubers who made channels on Sikhism. You just look through the comments, and every single person says, man, I love Sikhs. They're atheists. I'm an atheist, but man, if I were to be in a religion, it would be Sikhism. It makes the most sense. I don't know what Sikhism is about, but another person will say, I don't know what Sikhism is. All I know is that Sikhs, I've never met a Sikh who's not a really nice person who I'd like to be around. And as far as like what we can do is we can look at what made when Sikhi was at its strongest, when we had a Sikh Raj, and when he had the gurus were presiding. So you can look at the Raja Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and you can look at the time of the Gurus. And how did they treat education, and how do they treat the youth? Look at the story. I mean, this is why these little stories, to me, they're for adults too. This is so basic to translate Sikh Banis and history into English, because most countries in the world know English. And if it's not available in English, then how are most people in the world even going to be exposed to what we believe in, what we're talking about? And now, today, most of our second and third generation Punjabis in the West, and even in the Punjab, don't know our Sikh history and our heritage and anything. So even them, it's helpful to have it in English. So if we can't even translate our stuff in English, we're far behind. That's like a very surface level thing. The next level is we need to move towards making sure that we start educating our children at age 5 onwards. And we should be moving towards that goal of them being able to give a kata on these things. And don't condescend to them. Because they're young doesn't mean they're not very wise. So we've lost this ability to just see that these younger generations, we don't have to always see them as the younger generation. We have to see them as they're adults now. Just go ahead and give them the respect. And if they mess it up, then they're learning as adults. Give them more responsibility. Give them more leadership. We need to resurrect the Dastar Bandi ceremony. You make them into a man at age 12. And their responsibilities in the household should change. Their outlook in life should change at that time. And they should have a leadership at that point. And if they mess up the leadership, well, good for them. That's part of the learning of how to be a good leader.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with some of your points on leadership. Like, I'm in a leadership role within my work, and it is a lot about messing up, and there's not necessarily one way of doing things. You find your own way, and as long as you're trying your best, you're working hard, it's generally acknowledged that it's fine what you're doing. The model that you laid out with learning about Sikhi from a young age, I think is really important. I have Pakistani patients who they all uniformly will get their kids into Quran studies from age 4 or 5 onwards. Mm-hmm. So that would be early morning classes 3 times a week or however often. And I think it's brilliant because they're in touch with the language, and then once they've got a grasp of the language, then they can start to study the Quran. Whereas most of my generation, and definitely the generation below me, I would say, can't read or write Gurmukhi, and they can't speak Punjabi very well. Whereas I find the Pakistani community that I meet, they can speak Urdu, Punjabi, English. Difficult to read Gurbani if you can't read Punjabi, and it's difficult to learn Punjabi if you don't have a connection with why. Why would you want to learn Punjabi in today's day and age? If you have some kind of affinity towards Sikhi, then, and some love for the history, which is an easy way to get people involved in a non kind of shoving it down people's throat way, then I think it's brilliant what you're working on at the moment. So what is the Sikh Net Stories?
So I was saying a little bit before we started the recording that, when I first started making the stories, it was largely about, we've all heard different stories, Guru Nanak emerges in the river and, whatever stories we'd heard, and it was just kind of trying to put them out there and just tell them in a kind of engaging way. And then as time goes on, I started, the internet, there's one forum where they have a different version of a story, and then somebody else tells a story, and then you later learn that it wasn't the most authentic version. And I would just try to put together what I thought was the most authentic thing, or the thing that made the most sense. And but I didn't have too much. I didn't know at that time that the Sikh history itself is not a settled subject. There's not just that story. That you start to understand that there's Janam Sakhis, and the Janam Sakhis have different versions, and they say very different things. And those are the kind of some of the earliest versions of Sikh history. Then I've always heard about the Suraj Prakash Granth. If you ever heard Katha from any of the major Katha Vachaks, by Pindarpal, Gyani Thakur, Most Kathavachiks, they will all, Gyani Sher Singh, they will talk about the Suraj Prakash Granth. I was very fascinated to learn, actually. It was by Harman Singh from Basics of Sikhi, who I was trying to ask him about Suraj Prakash Granth, and he shared the PDF. And I was like, it's available? Anybody can look at this thing? I thought it was like this secret that only, like, there's only a few copies of it, and only these few Kathavachiks have access. It's available for anybody to find online. It has a kind of, like I was saying, the old Punjabi and then a kind of more modern Punjabi translation. It's not available in English, but it's available. So I was so like, it was seemed like such a treasure house that was now found that the Suraj Prakash Granth is available. Now the only job is to translate it. And then we take that and we can cross-reference it with other Granths, like the Vansavali Nama is another Granth, and we retell it. So I shared with you something that's not released at the moment publicly. It's the story of the Ancient One. That story is amazing. I've heard that story a long time ago, but as far as I know, this is the first time it's been available in English. And so we just, this last week, released the translation work that we did. And so that just the translation work in English is available. And then we have, of course, the story and the writing of the story and all that stuff. And the animation is going to come out very soon. And so that's what I want to be working towards, is getting the most original like sources for history and then revealing this history. A lot of people probably haven't heard that story. It's an extremely, that story itself would be the foundation of an other religion. If it was another like place in history, that story alone would be all you need to create a religion. But for Sikhi, there's so much depth and so much like unbelievable, unfathomable things that happen in Sikhi in 200 years of the Gurus being here, that it's like a little side note that hardly anybody's heard of. It's a really, really profound story.
I remember when I used to stay at Guru Gobind Singh Nivas, which was behind Akal Takht Sahib, and they used to have 2 bookstores there. I know Amrit has changed now, but they had.
I believe isn't Guru Gobind Singh Nivas is one Nivas that was actually like founded and managed by NRI Sikhs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the more palatable thing for like NRIs to come to be in Amritsar. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. They have air conditioning, and they have warm water. So it's
totally side subject.
We've always stayed there when we've stayed, and the bookstores are right next to it. And so I would always go and say, okay, what books do you have in English? By Veer Singh, by Raghuveer Singh Beer, some of the more popular Sikh authors. And it was really disheartening because I would see them throw away tons of books because no one was buying them. And you just think there's so much history there. There's so much depth and breadth of knowledge, and it's all being lost because it's not being translated. The next generation don't speak Punjabi, so it's just they don't have an interest in buying these kinds of books. So what you're doing is just bridging that gap, and it's beautiful.
You know, some people, I think it's just going back to this whole subject of being born as a Sikh and all that. I think this is related because I think we need to stop looking at it as I'm a Sikh and I was born as a Sikh, that this is a religion. We look at this as this is a culture. A religion is something that you fit into or something that you have. A culture is something that you carry forward or that you propagate. It's more of an entity that exists. It's not a thing that you fit into. It's something that you want to expand. You want to carry forward. We want to highlight our culture. We want to bring our culture forward. We want to advance the culture with our generations. So Sikhi is a culture, and we should stop thinking about it as a religion. And any culture that is strong has 2 things. It has songs and it has stories. So long as you have your songs, so long as you have your stories, you will have a good culture. And nobody has more songs than Sikhs. We're the scripture that is composed only in song. And nobody has more stories. Nobody could have more Messiah stories, more Satguru level, like highest level of enlightenment stories than 200 years of Guru Nanak in 10 forms.
Yeah.
So there's nothing parallel to that. So nobody has more stories and more songs. So this is the most like deep culture. It's just like the point is that like a lot of people are thinking about Sikhi as like, oh, that's what that's my grandpa was like really deep into this. It's just this Punjabi. They link it in with Punjabi language. And they link it into that's what grandpa did, and that's the old people, and we're modern people. We have a different way of thinking and living, and it's like no. I refute that claim. Sikhi is just getting started. Christianity was a very fringe for the first 200 or 300 years. And then overnight it became the religion of the empire, and now it's the number one world religion. It's just getting started. We haven't even translated our history into English. We haven't started yet.
You see how much World Health Organization says depression will be the number one disability in the world in a few years. Anxiety is highest in Western nations, US being number one, Canada and the UK being number two, joint second. So these are epidemic.
It's a culture. It's a regressive culture that's not good for your health. It's not good for the progress of noticing the maturity in your generations. It's not good for empowering and giving yourself leadership. Almost every single thing that we have in our culture is somehow counter to being actually a strong culture. The songs that we have, what songs do we have? They're all about like material things that are temporary and emotional in nature. They're not things that give us strength. What stories do we have? It's all celebrity stories. There's a neoliberal culture which is spreading unhealthy food, McDonald's, and throughout the world. So it's not even societies and countries, it's culture. And that's why Sikhi is a culture, and it's very different. It builds strength rather than weakness.
My favorite thing about Sikhi is going back to what you were saying about it being a kind of an elder generation thing, and I think that view is held by many people in the UK. I was born and brought up here in the UK. I'm educated. I have a master's. My wife has a PhD, and we've gained things from Sikhi that we've never gained from the Western body of knowledge that's out there. And the practical stuff that we've gained, peace, the contentment, the satisfaction, has been purely because of Sikhi. It's a practical way of life, and if we can live it, and then if we can show others that actually, if you do these things, you can achieve happiness. Like Aristotle said, the key to life is happiness, or that's the purpose of life, right? That's one philosophy, but we're nowhere near that in Western society. Depression is obviously a sign, it's the polar opposite of being happy. There's a practical methodology to be able to achieve that. And so it's really profound, and I think it is about getting it out there, and I think it is a lot about practice as well, because if you practice it, then you have to experience it first. Otherwise, I think it's difficult. If you, that is a crude example, but if you went to the gym and there was a really obese, unhealthy PT who was smoking and eating McDonald's, and they're saying to you, I can get you fit and healthy, I feel like you have to live it. And when you're experiencing it, then you have something to share. And I think when you confound it with being a religion, then you can get bogged down in things which necessarily won't bring you any joy and happiness, like rituals.
It's like, oh, I have this obligation. I have to do the Bani's. I have to wake up and I have to do Bani's, and that's my religious kind of duty. And it's like, do you realize that martial artists, they also have to show up to class, and they also have to do the same punches and same kicks that the black belt has to do, the white belt has to do? Yeah. They all have their same basic practice, and that's just like, it's not about simply showing up just to do a ritual.
Yeah,
the gurus are not for that. It's about like invoking vibration. It's about invoking the Nam, and as a very basic method, like this is a very basic guaranteed method that if you're very not tuned in with spiritual stuff, at the very minimum, get up in the early morning and do these things, and the guru will cover the rest for you. That's if you're just like very away from spirituality. So it's like it's a fail-safe. Our rehet is a fail-safe, and it's like, but it's not for religious purposes. It's for vibrational purposes.
Gosix gave the example of if your parents ask you for, can you get me a glass of water, son, and you say, you mata take to them, and you say Satbachin, and they say, I'm really thirsty, would you mind getting me a glass of water? And you just mata take to them again and again. They're like, I'm asking you for water, and you're doing something else. And so Gurbani does have instructions in terms of how to live your life, do's, don'ts. And I truly believe if someone adheres to that, they will experience an uplifting.
Like sharing a little anecdote with you, and that's that there was one who's at NRIC, and somehow he connected with me on Facebook, and we were always going back and forth. And one time he was telling me he was just not feeling it. He was just kind of in a low mood. He was kind of depressed, and I said, well, let's give a number. We'll do something. We'll do an experiment with Gurbani. But first, I want you to give me a number from 1 to 10. What is your feeling right now? And he said, like, yeah, it's pretty bad. I think I'm at a 2 right now. And I said, okay, now we're going to do something for 40 minutes. And we did this one Shabad again and again for 40 minutes. And this one is like a pretty Chardi Kala Shabad. It's not even necessarily you understand what it means, but it's a Dasambani, so it has an effect regardless. I think it took us less than 40 minutes. We did 35 minutes of it. And it's Kagakandabhandang, Kardakandang, Nataranamandang, Barabandang. It's a 4-line Shabad. So we did that, and you can do it in one breath. You take a deep breath and you do the whole thing in one go. And so we did 108 of those. And that's a practice that a friend of mine kind of invented. And I think it's a really great practice. So we did this experiment. He takes the number, he's in the level 2 before. We do for 40 minutes, and I say, "How do you feel?" He said, "I'm so like energized, man. I'm at a 6 or 7 right now. Above 5 is not bad. What happened here is that Bani destroyed your pain. That's what Gurbani always says. Gurbani always says that the Shabad has destroyed my pain. And it's like you've just proven Gurbani to be true. That's one thing. That's a miracle that just happened in your life that you should never forget. But also, understand that people pay doctors to get, no offense to doctors, obviously, this is a much more holistic way to receive an antidepressant medication. You just did something that you didn't have to take from the outside. You simply moved your tongue in some way, and then you became less depressed afterwards. That's phenomenal. That's absolutely amazing. How many of the 7 billion people on the planet Earth, if all of them knew that you could simply do some kind of meditation like this is like an incredible formula. Imagine of the 7 billion people, how many people would like, how much would they pay to just know that there's some technique that you don't have to keep paying the doctor or the medication, that you can do a recitation instead, and you'll go from a 2 to a 6 or whatever it was. Yeah. That's phenomenal.
Very powerful and underutilized tool. What are your goals moving forward? Because presumably, to get to where you are, you've had KPIs, key performance indicators, you've looked at how things are trending and what's working and what isn't working, and qualitative feedback from people who've sent in messages regarding what's been really impactful for them, and you've shared some of the feedback. So how do you shape that into your 5-year vision?
So one thing, we kind of had a test case where we released the story, an audio story of one point in history. And then another Sikh organization also released a story that was actually animated. And we just had the audio, and they had the animated version. And I got feedback from somebody played this to their children. And they said, actually, the story you made, Harija, was like, almost twice as long. So you would think that the kids would lose their attention, but actually they were more engaged. And he said why they were more engaged is because you really do much more kind of world building. You're much more focused on creating character voices. So rather than having simply the narrator just kind of tell everything in one go, do it representing everybody and everything that's going on, you're creating sound effects and you're creating voices, and it kind of makes it feel like you're in this place, and the kids can kind of put themselves there. So it's kind of more immersive. So I'd really take that to heart in my vision for carrying forward stories, to try to engage the mind. That's what it's all about. These stories are meant to inspire the mind, to implant messages in the brain, not simply to throw something at a kid's face. As the audio stories, there was no animation for quite a number of years, and audio stories were kind of gaining their own momentum, and a lot of people were kind of like sharing them. But through time, it became clear that the trend was starting to go downwards, because everything's now about video. So I do believe that it's much better if the kids only listen through audio, because they're creating the images in their own brain. So the vision is to continue to, like, capture the attention of people and give them good content. But I will always want to be there, like giving in messages like this in a podcast and in other places, to say it's still better if you teach your kids, and it's still better if they listen to just audio, and it's even still better if they read for themselves. Come to the point where they can just read stories and they can read Sikh history and they can read other things that are stimulating. That's very, very healing for their brains. And the in-person interactions are very good. I mean, so the 5-year vision is like, yes, we do want to continue to amp up the animations. That's like super important. The theme that keeps popping up is that we want to take the Sikh history and whatever they're learning and parallel it with modern life, so that we get away from this thing that this is something that happened in the past and it's unrelatable. So we keep kind of like juxtaposing what's happening in the Saki to what's happening in a modern kid's life. And that's a model that we're going to continue with. And we want to create a series, actually, that we could tell any number of stories with this type of model. We do have, like, one of our biggest animation, the biggest animation we ever made was the Mike Bago story. And you have that. You have it where it starts in a modern day life in a science. There's a science competition at her middle school, whatever school it was, and then she learns about Mike Bago, and that helps her to excel in her academics. So that's the kind of model.
And if people want to contribute, if people have benefited from SeekNet stories, how can they contribute? How can they get involved?
Well, the general support you can do is you go to seeknet.com/donate, and every time you donate, there's a way that you can log, like, why you donated, and you can say, I donated because of the stories. We have had a couple times where we had a specific donation where somebody, this was actually a story that I wrote. It's not Sikh history. It's just some lesson that came to my mind, and I formed a story surrounding that lesson, and it was called The Secret to Happiness and Success. It was actually a 2-part story. If you've been listening to audio stories, your kids maybe know it better than you do.
Was it the one about the book? About the book of gratitude?
Yes.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
I just fabricated that out of my mind, and I just knew that this was a very good thing, and I want to do it, and I want to spread that idea. So apparently there was some, not kids, some full-grown adults that also really liked this story before it was, as an audio. And I guess the brother passed away. And so the sister made a specific donation and said, my brother really loved these 2 stories about the gratitude book, the kindness and the goodness and kindness book, and the Secret to Happiness and Success stories. And they made a specific donation to please animate these stories. We want to see them animated to get them out there more. I do want to fundraise for the stories. If somebody wants to sponsor an episode, if somebody wants to sponsor a Saki, that's available. And you can send an email to stories@seeknet.com. You can also just send it to hadijot@seeknet.com.
Ask about that, actually. So in terms of the time of all the people who are working on something, advertising something, the back-end tech, the actual animations, the time, if you were to pay someone who is a narrator, I know some of the Sevadas might be doing some of this, but what would the cost, just to give Sandit an idea of, actually, it's not easy what you've done or what you're doing. It is a huge body of work. It's a huge accomplishment what you've achieved so far. And if we want to keep benefiting from it, we need to contribute to it.
There's a lot. And I mean, I can just give a basic idea. Just the translation itself is a project. That could be its own funding. And to do original translations itself is a project. Then I go through and I take all of the whole original text and I try to format it into a script, and then the most efficient way is if I recite it, but I don't like to be the only person. Then the audio mixing and this is like every single aspect of this. In a different organization, these would be different jobs. We'd have a job for the translation person. That's a very significant job. You have a job for the script person. That's its own expertise. Then you have a job for the person who's doing all the audio mixing. That's also its own expertise. Then you have the animation, which is also significant. Putting all those hours together, it's a lot. It's a lot of time. The only thing I can say is you might be surprised how much time goes into each sentence of these stories. Just to reiterate, the general thing is donate to SeekNet, seeknet.com/donate, and then you can specify why you're giving. And if you want to sponsor something specifically, then you can contact me at harijod@seeknet.com. As far as I'm concerned, it's just started. Like I said, it's the same thing with Sikhi as a whole. We haven't even made ourselves available to this English-speaking world. How can we say that this is an old religion and this is my grandpa's thing? This is the grandchildren's thing. We just don't know it yet. This is for our great-grandchildren.
Well, I could talk to you all day, and I think there's so much we could talk about, and I look forward to having, hopefully with your permission, having more conversations. And
please, let's do it. Absolutely.
Future. But thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. I'm really happy to meet you. I'm happy to be here.